You're listening to another episode of From the Dust with Sarah Decker, a place to explore spiritual experiences and topics. And no, we are never alone. Conversation with Raymond Moulten. Is that correct how I said that?
Yep.
Great. And he had a harrowing experience, really. An experience that brought him close to death. And today we'll be discussing that experience with him. And so welcome to the show today, Aaron.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here and for being willing to share. I know it's therapeutic to share, but also personal. You know, it's something that's personal to you and vulnerable as well. So thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So one of the first questions I have is, what is your life like before this event? Because we're going to be talking about an event that happened, right? So what was your life kind of like before that? And we'll start there.
Okay. So since it kind of happened right after I was working, I work as a nurse anesthesiologist. It's another name for CRNA. And what's, I think from my perspective, I think about this from a consciousness perspective, and I feel like I have a pretty good understanding, more than most, as far as what consciousness is, and being asleep versus awake, and so I work full time as a nurse anesthesiologist, providing anesthesia for various types of cases in the hospital setting for the most part, and then at home I've got two kids. They're adopted, and they're actually cousins, and they're in many ways they're twins. They're only a couple of months apart in age, and boy girl. We adopted the girl from birth, and the boy that we adopted is a second cousin that we got about a year and a half ago, and finalized his adoption this last year. And they're very energetic, and there's a little bit of trauma background, and things that as parents, everybody knows their own kids better than anybody else. And so, you're very involved with their care, and my wife, Kari, we've been married 24 years, and kind of got our kids late due to infertility issues. And so that's really what occupied most of my time was, trying to spend time with my wife, taking care of the kids, and then reaching family goals, just, going on vacation, visiting relatives or holidays or birthdays, things coming up, just kind of like the day-to-day thing. And we're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. My wife, Kari, is very involved with primary. She's the primary president in our ward. And so she's... For
those who don't know what that is, primary being the younger kids, right?
Yeah, ages. I can't remember what age they go into the first class. I think it's 2 years old, up until age 11. And in our area, or a local area, there's I would say close to 100 kids, so it's pretty involved. There's all the teachers and things like that. So she does that, and then I do twice a month. I do classes with the kids. It's kind of like Cub Scouts. The church has gone away from scouting, but had replaced it with the similar activities program. So I'm involved with that. And then, as far as the church goes, our day-to-day sort of practice and devotions, I guess you could say. So, I hope that kind of gives a little bit of a picture.
It does.
So, yeah.
It does. So then so it was just another day, right? Then you went to work that day, and then what happened?
Yeah. So, that day I had some plans for after work, which will come into play as I'm telling the story, but, basically routine day. I was actually working at the hospital where my daughter was born. And so that is kind of holds a special place in my heart for that. And I got off work at about 3 o'clock, and Interestingly, I had been listening to a podcast um, produced by John By the Way, and I forget the name of his other host, but it's called Follow Him podcast. And the host had been talking about losing her husband suddenly to a pulmonary embolism and how she was dealing with that. And I remember thinking, like, this is probably maybe 20 minutes before I was released from work, thinking, my life is plenty complicated right now. I don't feel like I need any of these trials, like with my kids and everything going on. I'm good. I don't need anything hard to deal with, like this lady dealing with. And I just kind of pushed that off to the side. Um, and then, so I started walking out to, I walked through the locker room. I changed clothes. I grabbed my car keys. I passed through what we just call the doctor's lounge, which is basically just like a dining area with food and snacks and water. So I grabbed a water bottle and headed out to my car, which is out in the parking structure, and stepped up into my vehicle. And as soon as I got into the driver's seat, I started feeling like kind of like a wave of dizziness, like maybe if you stood up too fast. And I thought, oh man, must have had my surgeon's hat on too tight. And I kind of looked over in the seat, and but the dizziness wasn't going away. And I was like, oh man, okay, whatever. I got stuff to do. And at the time we had plans to drive down to Gilbert, which is probably a 45-minute drive to the south, to meet up with somebody who was selling a couple of used bikes, and we were going to go buy those for the kids that night. And so I needed some cash from the ATM, and I was like looking at my phone, and I'm like swiping or whatever, and I can't read what's on my phone. And I had my glasses on, so I took my glasses off, and they're like the transitions. So if you go like this, they can kind of warp the image a bit. So I'm like, oh, I can take these off. And that was actually worse. It was like had my phone literally right here, but it was like it was way out here. And that was very disturbing to me. And I thought, I don't know what this is, but I'm trained to recognize stroke symptoms. I'm 49 years old. I shouldn't be having a stroke, but I'm not going to wait around to find out. And so, having seen patients in the hospitals and what possible scenarios could arise, I basically grabbed what I needed out of my car, or what I thought I would need, my phone, my keys, my wallet, and stuff like that. And I was like, I'm right here. I'm at the hospital. I might as well just turn around and walk to the ER. And in the time that I left my vehicle to the time that I got to the door, I was already starting to lose coordination. I was starting to lean a little bit to the right. I kind of felt a little bit of tingling. I actually did. This might be interesting. Is that I actually stuck my tongue out, like it's in the rearview mirror. I was like, is my tongue off to the side, and it was actually a little bit to the right. I thought it was straight, and I was like, oh, that's just me. It's not straight. Whatever, no big deal. But by the time I got to the door of the hospital, I was starting to lose my fine motor skills. So like I had my key card, my badge, and I swiped the badge, but I was like late on the uptake to open the door. So I had to swipe it again, pull the door open, and then that pathway went through the cafeteria. So I kept walking. And I was like, I got to start looking for a wheelchair. And just as I was walking through the lobby, there was a nurse coming through the door with a wheelchair that she had dropped off a patient. And in my mind, I was like, ask her for the wheelchair. Go just like plop yourself down in the wheelchair. And what actually came out was, where's the ER? And she's like, oh, it's over there. And she pointed to the left, which was straight ahead for me. And I was just like, kept walking. And then I'm like, well, wait, you should have gone and sat in the wheelchair. But I was like, oh, I don't know what's going on. My brain was foggy. She ended up going straight and down the hall to the elevator, and the ER was pretty much right there. So I started kind of looking around for what looked like a registration area. I got up there and pulled out my wallet. I didn't even notice this, but that was actually my daughter's insurance card that I looked at later. But so I was looking for my insurance card, and they asked for an ID at the window, and then I started to feel dizzy enough. I'm like, here, just take my wallet, and kind of like plunked it down the counter, and the receptionist was like, yeah, don't you worry, we'll get you checked in. That's fine. And so I sat down, and I had tried to call my wife a couple times before, but she was not answering. So I tried to call her again. And actually, I thought she called me. And then as I was telling the story, my wife's like, no, you called me. I did not call you. I was like, okay, whatever. And so I got her on the phone. And what I really wanted to say was, instead of meeting you where you're at before we drive down to Gilbert, I need you to come here. But what actually came out was, I'm having symptoms. And I expected everybody else to understand what that meant, that I'm having symptoms. But really, it was, I'm having stroke symptoms. And she's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? What do you need me to do? And then she goes, Aaron, you need to tell them that you're having a stroke. And I was just kind of sitting there, just like expecting her to check me in. But the clock was ticking. And my wife, she's also a nurse. So she was like, no, you need to get up there and you need to tell that nurse that you're having a stroke. And I couldn't even get that, couldn't get that out. So I looked over at the guy sitting next to me and I go, here, take my phone and hand it to the nurse up there at the window and tell him that my wife is on the phone. So he's like, okay, and walked over, and I'm just kind of sitting there, like almost like just an observer, just kind of waiting, because I feel like my nervous system had started to become like attenuated, like someone was turning down the signal. I could move if I was very deliberate about it, but it wasn't like easy, or like I had to be very much more deliberate about anything that I did. And so I was just kind of sitting there watching, and another nurse came out, the triage nurse came out, and she was kind of like, okay, whatever, put your arms out and do this, do that. She did like a neuro check. And then she's like, okay, well, sit here. And they put me in a wheelchair and wheeled me kind of back into the ER area. And then she's like, well, I guess we'll call stroke alert. And then a couple seconds later, I hear like overhead in the hospital, I forgot the words that they say, but it's, stroke alert, ER, whatever. And then this army of people comes in. They pull off my shirt, put me in a gown, put an IV in, took me to the CT scanner. And I've been around these things done this job for 10 years. I've been in those rooms, and they're super familiar to me. That's like, like the back of my hand. But going into that room as a patient was very, very different. And I knew people were going to do a good job. So part of it was just like, okay, I know that they're going to do a fine job at doing this task. But also I was just kind of like limp, just kind of like surrender to the situation. They put me in the tube, and it wasn't really a tube. That a CT machine is actually like a donut, but you're on like this sliding table, and so they slid me partway into the table, and I could hear the whirring sound of the machine, just the equipment just making this spinning sound. And in my head, because I just started closing my eyes, I'm laying there, and it felt like I was in a collider, like the atomic colliders, but I was like going around in circles at the tempo of the whirring of the machine. I'm sure I'm not the first person to think this as you're going into that machine. And I've studied like wormholes and space-time continuum. I love, learning about the cosmos, but I'm like, I'm in a wormhole. I'm traveling through space. And the thought did occur to me, I'm like, did I have like an accidental exposure to one of my anesthetic drugs or something that's making me have these weird feelings? And so I just kind of closed my eyes, and these lights started kind of flashing. I don't even know if there's actually lights in the room, but I felt like there were lights flashing over my face. And I could barely stand to be in there. And of course, that's not uncommon. And they said, okay, you're going to feel the contrast go in. And so like this warmth goes in, starts in my arm and kind of goes throughout my whole body. And that just enhances the image that they're trying to get of my brain to see if there's any hemorrhagic bleeding going on. And I literally, like, at that moment, I was like, is this how it's going to end? Like, and I had read all those stories or heard all those stories and was thinking, okay, I know what the pattern is, that when people are going to die, they might have visitations from relatives on the other side. Sometimes portals open up in the room, or a light, or they go, there's a tunnel and they go down the tunnel and see a light. And I was really like nervous that was going to start happening. I was like, 10 minutes ago, I was worried about, am I going to be able to make the drive down to Gilbert? And here I am, like, traveling through space and time, and I might not even see my family or kids again. And
Is that kind of hit you?
What's that?
Is that when it kind of like hit you what was going on?
Yeah, it kind of dawned on me in those moments, and I was actually really upset because as an anesthesia provider, we are super anal about the monitoring systems that we have. We have pulse oximetry, blood pressure, EKG, and we're like, watching our patients like a hawk for any sign of distress or anything. And none of that was connected to me during the scan. And so I'm sitting there like, I'm a sitting duck. Nobody's watching what's happening. They have no idea. I'm just a body in the machine, and they're like, hurry up and do the scan. And so it was upsetting that nobody else was potentially aware of what was happening. And I could have been wrong. Maybe there was equipment connected to me, but in my mind, I didn't feel like that was being monitored. And I don't know if you've heard of the book called The Survivors Club. It was probably published 15 years ago. And I remember reading where people had near-death experiences, but they were like, no, I cannot die right now. I need to hang on for my family, whether it was an accident or even people who had committed suicide, but changed their mind midstream, like jumped off a bridge. And then they were like, whoa, wait, this is not from, I don't want to die. And they said they felt like something lifting them out of the water and up to the surface. And they survived, obviously, to tell the tale. And so I was like, I'm not, I got to take control of this situation. So I just started doing the only thing I knew how to do at that moment in time, and that was to take big, deep breaths. As an anesthesia provider, it's airway, breathing, circulation. So I'm like, take deep breaths. Just keep that oxygen to your brain. And so I don't know if I was hyperventilating or what was necessarily happening physiologically, because I was having a hard time, like, self-observing, right? So
fair enough, right? You had a lot going on.
Yeah. Like, I'm not supposed to be my own anesthesia provider, right? That's not how it works. So they finished the scan, and I'm like trying to take deep breaths. They roll me into an ER bay, and I was told by my wife later that it was like the big one, the big room where lots of people go. And word started getting out that there's a CRNA that works here in the ER. It's just different when there's a fellow medical person in the area. And later I found out that they thought I was a CNA, which is like bottom rung caregiver. And I was like, oh no, I'm like top provider. I'm like top of the food chain, guys. And like, make sure you get that straight. And anyway,
ego's jumping in there. Nope, that's not me, man.
There's about 10 years and what I would consider PTSD standing between me and that other designation. So I'm like, don't you forget that that's where I've been. But anyway, so I'm in this room, and So they parked me in there, and in front of me is about 5 nursing students, and they're all standing on what they call a computer on wheels, and they're all standing there like, I don't know, taking notes. I felt like they were snickering, like, oh, look at this, that, or whatever. But really, they were probably just trying to learn nursing, whatever. Um, and I was a little bit embarrassed or whatever. I felt like, is it appropriate to have that many people there watching? Um, and so I'm sitting there and I'm still thinking, I'm not sure if I'm going to see my family. I'm not sure if I can see my wife. And I knew she was on the way. Um, and I don't know if you heard that sound go off, but that was the sound I kept hearing. Like they had my phone next to me, and I kept hearing like texts go off. And I repeated my wife's phone number a couple of times. I said, um, my wife's phone number is 801, blah, 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 blah. And they were like, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. You just get in the scanner. We'll take care of that later. You're going to be fine. And I was like, no, you're going to have to look it up in my chart. You're not sure. You don't know what her phone number is, and I need you to call her right now. Because she's a nurse. I wanted her to be there to be my advocate in case I couldn't speak for myself. And so once I got into the ER bay, I told the nurse, I go, I need you to call my wife and tell her what bay I'm in. Because I don't want her to be, I don't know, I was just trying to shave the time off her response, her arrival. And she's like, okay, I'll call your wife. And then I didn't hear from the nurse again, but I was sitting there and I had my phone right next to me, and I'm waiting and waiting. It seemed like an eternity. And I picked up my phone, and I wasn't completely sure why I said this, but I just typed out, and then I managed to type it out. I love you, all caps, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. But I felt like that was the last message I was going to get out because I wasn't sure where I was going to go. And I didn't hear back from her until she arrived, but these are some of the miracles that actually happened behind it, like on the other side of the story from her perspective, is that she was at an indoor play place with the kids. And normally when she says, okay, kids, get your shoes on, we got to go, it's like a 30-minute ordeal. Find your shoes. They took them off and threw them in the ball pit or something, and they're like, oh, I lost them or this, or my friend doesn't want me to go or what. And it's a huge ordeal. No, this time it was like they put their shoes on and they were ready to go in like 30 seconds. Completely out of character, right? And my cousin who lives with us and she cleans houses had a cancellation. So she actually, as to help to like cover or to like in trade for rent, she cleans our house. And she had a cancellation that day and was actually coming early to clean her house. So she was home. And my wife goes, hey, Heather, I need you to take the kids. There's an emergency. Okay, so she swings by the house, drops the kids off. So she ditches the kids within 10 minutes, which normally as a mom, you're like, it could take hours to forever to like do something without your kids. So she gets on the road, but as she's driving, a rainstorm hits, a freak rainstorm, no forecast for rain at all. But it's like this giant weather cell that's parked between the hospital and our house. And it literally, you're in Missouri. I lived in Florida, and in Florida, when you get a torrential downpour, there's like 3 feet of haze bouncing off the road from the water splashing. There's 2 inches of standing water on the road at any given time. And there's people pulled off because their wipers can't keep up with the rain. That's what kind of storm was hitting. And it turned the freeway into a parking lot. And my wife is just crying to get there. It took her an hour to do a 20-minute drive. And I didn't know any of this was going on. This passage of time had completely become warped for me. I didn't know how much time had really passed. And after I sent that text, I kind of slipped into what I would say almost like a waking dream or very vivid dreams. And I could feel like my stretcher was normally horizontal. It felt like it was tipping like this and like dumping me into, and then in front of me, it didn't physically look like a vortex or like a pit, but it felt like there was something pulling me toward that. So the room is tipped on its end. I'm trying to go down, which is actually forward, or I'm being pulled in that direction. And I don't remember. It's a good thing that I don't remember what was happening, but I felt like, and I don't know if it was you or somebody else, but talked about on the Facebook page, the Valley of the Shadow of Death. And in pop culture, it looked like Mordor from Lord of the Rings. So like just this burnt, jagged landscape, dark skies with maybe like orange hues in it, and I reviewed Lehi's dream, and he walked for hours in this waste before he saw the tree of life. And I don't know what the message necessarily was, because he was being led by an angel through this wasteland. And I saw that in the After Death documentary, where that one man, he walked through a wasteland. He was being carried by those beings through this wasteland, and he was trying to turn back, and they're like, "Oh no, you still have to keep walking." But in my experience, it was more like, I don't just feel like torment, to be vague, and it was the worst place I could imagine. Maybe an inspiration for depictions of hell. And I don't know how long I was in and out of this environment, because I would open my eyes and I had forgotten where I was, and they had given me like a basin, because I started looking like I was nauseous. So there's this basin in front of me, and I'd open my eyes and I'd be like, "What's this basin here?" Okay, and then I would lay back and probably fall asleep again, and started to think.
Did that scene stay the same where it looked like that Mordor, or did it like change at all as it progressed?
Hold on just a sec.
Yeah.
Yeah, each time I went back, it was still that landscape. And I started to think like, okay, why am I here? Why is this happening? And I remember, fast forward just for a minute, where after my wife had arrived, I was feeling this pull into this vortex, and I was leaning over on my wife, and I think I had my arm around her or something, and I was just like, why? And I was stumbling over my words, but I was saying, what's happening? And it was just like a warping, but like a gravity, almost like a magnetic pull toward this vortex. And at one point, my wife walked in the room. She arrived finally, and I think at that point, when she first saw me, I had my eyes closed, and in her work, she's seen a deceased person, and how the blood runs out of the body, and you turn pale, like stasis, like the blood is not there anymore. And she said, "You looked like a dead body." And I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know that's what I felt like, what I looked like. But they had offered me a blanket when I was in the bay. And I said, "No, I'm good." But I must have, I might have been shivering or something, but it was cold enough where a normal person would have wanted a blanket, but I almost had no sensation in my skin and on my body. And she said that my pupils were constricted, And I don't know if you can see, but there's a little spot right on my nose right there from like sun. She said I couldn't see that anymore. That had gone pale. Um, and and then she said that I looked very afraid. Um, and when I think when I, or let's see, so she saw me there, and at the time when she walked in, I had my hands on the rails of the stretcher, and I was like pushing back, like trying to fight this pull, right? And then I opened my eyes, and my feet were like on the stretcher doing this backwards walking, like digging my heels for everything I was worth, just digging my heels in the back of the stretcher. And my eyes were closed this whole time. I had no idea. And I opened up. I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I? This is crazy. What am I doing? Like I didn't feel in control of my body, but I was certainly feeling that pull. And I reached out to my wife, I must have grabbed her hand or something. And I think I said something to the effect of, don't let them get me. Don't let them take me. They want to take me. And it wasn't spoken in words, but I felt like there was somebody in front of me again, pulling me. And I was determined, like I had to get back to my family and to my wife and to what I felt like was the work that I still had to do. And I think she probably was trying to comfort me and stuff. And then I don't know how far into the time that she arrived to the point where she started doing this, but she may have excused everyone from the room. I don't think they were there when she did this, but she started praying over me. And the prayer was something like, that he'll have peace and that you won't be afraid. And her voice continued to kind of escalate in intensity and authority. I felt like she was invoking all of her power as my wife and speaking almost beyond the veil to relatives and family with her prayer to pray for me. And the thought occurred to me when she said that, and I don't know if this is something outside of the church that people do, but the thought occurred to me to raise my hand to the square. And I said those words. If you want to find out what that is, talk to a member of Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm not even sure if it's supposed to be on video. But I raised my hand to the square as a rebuke. Because I wasn't sure if it was an evil influence or not. I didn't know what the process was, what I was going through. But I wanted to rule it out as some way to stop what was happening. And later my wife said that once I had done that I did start to calm down. But I think at about right before she started praying over me, I have to describe this scene. If you've seen do you remember The Matrix, the first movie?
I recently watched it for the first time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a scene where Neo is being brought into the Matrix. And I think, what's the name of the character played by Lawrence Fishburne? I can't remember, but Morpheus says, "What is reality?" And Neo puts his finger out and there's a mirror in front of him. He touches the mirror and it goes, like starts to warp. And then it connects to his finger and it starts covering his finger with the mirror. And it goes up his body and then down his throat. And he starts to scream, and then his scream becomes this like digital amplification. So what I saw was in a circle going around and around, but it was like floorboards with jagged ends, but they were going in this circle. And then I was being pulled into the center of it, and the floorboards started coming up. It's like I was feeling it at the same time as I was watching it happen, just to a distant person. And it came up all of my body and just turned my entire body into these like floorboard scales slash branches slash arms. And at that moment in time, I was crying out to my wife, like, don't let them take me. And I couldn't hear what I was saying until I opened my eyes. And when I opened my eyes, I realized that I was screaming at the top of my lungs. And I can't imagine what anybody else in the room might have been thinking about, what they were seeing. And as working in the ER, you see crazy stuff all the time. So maybe they weren't that surprised. But I was embarrassed that that was happening, and as well as being very scared. And I honestly can't place whether that happened before or after she prayed over me. I'm guessing that it was before. But once I did actually raise my arm to the square, I believe that I did calm down. But at one point in the experience, I was saying, okay, I see three choices here. There's one, I die and this ends. Like my spirit leaves and this body, whatever's happening to it, is left behind. Two, I'm stuck in this in and out of consciousness where I'm being tormented. I have glimpses of reality, but I spend most of my time in this wasteland, in this Mordor. Or this dream state ends and I go back to who I was. I go back to my family. And I said, I want one or the other, do not want to be in this middle ground.
Now, I have a question. Were those options like something that occurred to you, or do you feel like they were kind of like offered to you? Does that make sense? The difference?
I think that the question came up mainly that I did not want to be in the middle. I did not want to be in the Mordor. It was bad enough that I was like, this is not life. I wanted to see my family, and I think I might know where you're going with this question, and it's where people would say they did not fear they did not fear death. They would rather be on the other side, deceased, than go back to their body. It didn't matter to them that they're like anything. The greatest day on earth was nothing in comparison to what they would experience in heaven. Or
I'm just curious if you had a guide, actually, because sometimes people in these experiences have somewhat of a guide, this being that's kind of like talking them through it. So that's why I was asking about that, actually.
Okay.
Was this presented to you as options, like with a guide type thing, or was this something that occurred to you and you're like, your analytical mind is like, hey, these are the options here, and I just know I do this one.
I don't remember a being, but there could have been, because at the when I was coming in and out, and like these episodes, like I would consider them like episodic dreams. There could have been personages or figures there, but I did not feel like there was someone really accompanying me or talking me through specifically. I did not see what I would, and as you maybe have noticed, that people analyze this throughout. It takes their whole life to really analyze this, and it's something that I actually have resolved to fast and pray about, to try to figure out more answers about what was happening, and maybe at that point some memories will come back. But I don't remember a specific being standing before me and saying, okay, you can choose. I just remember thinking to myself, this middle ground is hell, and I don't deserve to be there. I don't want to be there. I would choose, I want to live, right? But if living means that I have to stay in this middle ground, I don't want to be there. I would rather die than stay in this realm, this half alive, half dead realm. And I don't know if at one point when I said that to myself, it was sort of decided that I would go one way or the other. And honestly, I can't tell you, because in that documentary, and I agree with them, that the moment of death cannot be determined. And just because a body has vital signs, in my opinion, does not mean that that person has not left that body, at least partially. And I don't know if there's been research. It's hard to research that. But there's a possibility that my spirit had left my body periodically, because it felt so real that I was disconnected from my body. And from what my wife described, the way my body looked when she first saw me. What's the definition of death, right? If I looked like I was dead, I wasn't responding to, like, very well to being spoken to. What is that? And then if you think about it in terms of anesthesia, what's going on with my nervous system at that point in time? So the word anesthesia means lack of feeling, right? So somehow lack of feeling had overcome my body. So I was in this middle ground, I believe. And I've read a few things about that area where people tend to get stuck in that realm. But those who call upon the Savior, Jesus Christ, are pulled out of it. And only when I raised my arm to the square did I call upon Jesus Christ to help me. And I think that was when, and I didn't feel like I was plucked out. Some of the people described it as being sent like a rocket through the atmosphere into the tunnel with light at the end of it. What happened in my case was basically, and I want to talk about the blessing that I got too, but basically the periods of lucidity where I could maintain a train of thought became longer and longer. And the periods of the confusion and going into that intermediate Mordor realm became shorter and shorter. And you hear people talking about being called back. And I wonder if where I was in these dream/transcendental states where someone would say, Aaron, and then I would wake up and maybe my spirit was there, whether it was connected or in my body or not. I would then respond to my name and try to answer questions. Some of the doctors were coming in and trying to get neurological checks. And those moments were actually really clear, at least in my head. And that corresponds with the blessing I'll tell you about. So leading up to that, two of my friends had decided to go to the Phoenix Temple. And they lived down on the other side of town. So coming all the way up north to go to the Phoenix Temple. And the temple is like, as far as the church goes, is if any of the listeners have seen a temple or know what their purpose is, it's like a very holy building, a very holy church where we say that the veil is thin or that we are very close to God. So they were basically planning to go and worship in the temple that was located in the north side of Phoenix. And my wife had posted on Facebook for people to pray for me. And they must have been browsing Facebook or something and found out. I can't remember how they found out initially. But they called my wife on the phone and said, hey, we are 2 exits away and we can be there. Because I had asked for a blessing. That's a priesthood blessing. And so she said, yeah, that's fine. Come on. We would love to have you come in. So they showed up, and this other friend of mine, awesome guy, he was our Dungeons and Dragons dungeon master. A little bit nerdy as far as that goes. Like, before this, we would do those fun things. So he was our, but while we were doing the Dungeons and Dragons game, he said, hey, you guys interested in coming to my baptism? And we were like, okay, we had no idea that you were thinking about becoming a member. And so we're like, yeah, we fully support you. And so he and one of our other friends who was a member of the church were on the way to the temple. And they showed up at the hospital, and I was utterly relieved to see them. And my wife said, hey, can you give him a blessing? He says, well, I don't have the oil. And oil is part of the ordinance that we use to give blessings to heal the sick. And he said, I don't have any with me. And I said, well, I have some in my wallet, but you have to consecrate it. You have to set it apart for blessing. And he's like, I've never done that before. And I go, well, I think I can remember how to do it. So my thoughts were clear enough that I could actually talk him through.
That's like crazy and incredible.
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, I can remember. I got to do this. And so I said, just repeat after me. So I did the blessing. He consecrated the oil. And then he said, well, I've only ever done one blessing. And I said, that's okay. A blessing is a lot like the consecration. You just keep talking. So, so I said, I told him the words again, and then I let him take it from there. And he said, I bless you that you will make a full recovery. I hadn't asked for anything specific, because having given blessings before, sometimes you ask the person, is there anything specific you'd like me to ask for you? But I didn't say any of it. I just said, okay, it's you. You go by whatever you're inspired to say. Because I had all kinds of scenarios in my mind, what life was going to be life afterwards. I literally had thought, I'm going to be a vegetable. I'm going to be a burden on my wife. I don't know where this physiological process is going. But he said that you will make a full recovery, and you still have a lot of work to do in this life. And it was pretty basic. He didn't say much more than that. And I feel like once he had finished that blessing, that the periods of lucidity continued to lengthen and more. And they stayed there probably a couple of hours just talking to my wife. And about the time that they left, well, actually, close to the time that they left, I was actually telling dad jokes to them. Like, I keep a list of dad jokes in my phone just for periods of, whenever the time arose. And I was like, hey, how about this one? And we were sharing, some jokes together. And I even, I was a Dungeons and Dragons related joke. I said, hey, Jerome, can you do a Constitution check? And what that means is that you roll a dice to see what number you get, and whatever number you get is how high your score is, right? And he kind of chuckled at that, and then I sent him a gift that was like rolling a dice and you get a 20. And so I was sort of saying, I feel better. My constitution level is as high as it can be right now. So rewind a little bit. I think it was when they were there. I can't remember the exact timeline, but the ER doctor came in and he said, well, a lot of your symptoms are kind of vague. We're not sure exactly what's going on. And I don't think he even said, my wife said it. She said, well, what about the clot buster? If he's having a stroke, should we do a clot buster? And he said, well, let's find out. I'll check with the neurologist and see if it's okay. Because there's a danger of, if you give the clot buster, it can make a bleed worse. It can be fatal. So the CT scan that they had done prior came up. There was no bleed detected. And so the ER doctor went and talked to the neurologist. Neurologist talked to him. 20 minutes later, he came back in and he said, Mr. Moulten, the neurologist said it'd be okay if we gave the clot buster. Is that something you want to do? There's some risk with that, but it could help you. And I gave him a big old thumbs up. Like, I mustered all of my energy that is what I want. And so he said, okay, we'll get it ready. And a few minutes later, they gave that medication. And I had full faith that was going to help. Like, it was almost like, yes, that's what I need. That's what I've been wanting you to do. That's going to fix the problem. If it's a stroke, I know that's what I need. And so I think in my time frame of reference, within 45 minutes to an hour, that's where those periods of lucidity started to lengthen. And by that evening, I was what I would consider almost like 95% back to normal. I got to endure every neuro checks every 30 minutes, where it's like, okay, touch my finger, touch your nose. How many fingers am I holding up? And all that whole rigmarole for the next 24 hours. And then I had the next 24 hours to think about what had just happened. That's all I can think of right now.
Wow. What a story. I was really just on the edge of my seat listening. That is, I was thinking as you were telling your story, and I think it's Imagine Heaven here. It's a gentleman that had a near-death experience, wrote a couple books about near-death experiences as well, where he tried to like compile stuff. And I think he said that because he talks about the I don't know what he called them, the more like hellish kind of near-death experiences.
Yeah.
But he said that, I don't remember the percentage. I feel like it was 30 or 40%. He said of people that actually have near-death experiences, they are hellish experiences. They just don't talk about them as much because the fear, and they don't want to revisit, or the shame of feeling like God just told them they deserved hell and they don't want to talk about it. You know what I mean?
And from my perspective, right. That's why I'm curious about this whole scenario. Is like, I had read all of these wonderful, amazing, like the colors and the music and the love and the light and seeing relatives and all those check boxes, and none of that was there. And I'm like, I'm not a bad person. This is like, what is going on? I'm what you call temple worthy, right? So to go in the temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you have to answer questions in the affirmative, that you have a testimony of Jesus Christ. You accept him as your Savior, right? And that you believe that God the Eternal Father is the Creator, and he is your Father, right? Mm-hmm. And many other things. And that's who I've been all my life. I didn't even go through, like, as a teenager, did not have a rebellious period. And so it was very confusing to me, bewildering, and, like you say, shameful. But I mean, it was real. It was so real.
I feel like I should share with you one of the stories. I believe it's in this book. Is that this gentleman dies, and he doesn't want to. He's in that, I'm gonna fight this. I'm gonna fight
Yeah,
this death. I don't. I want to go back. And then he says there's someone shows up and tries to talk him into letting go. And then he realizes, no, like, I don't want that. I don't want that. And he said that he felt like it was like Satan was trying to come and tell him, hey, no, give up. Like, but he knew he had more to do in his life. And so he just was really fighting it. And so I find that interesting because, you know, there's other experiences where the people pass away and they feel that love of God emanating towards them and calling them. And that would be a very positive thing, you would think. But some people, that scares them because they've not maybe experienced that kind of love in their life, and they don't recognize it and they don't trust it. And so they're like, oh, no, thanks. And then they end up going to a less enjoyable space, you know, or because
yeah.
they reject that love of God. But that's not the same experience here. And so one thing I was thinking as you were sharing your story, I should stop rocking my chair here.
Oh, I lost you.
I think that
I lost connection there for a second when you said one
okay.
thing. So,
I'll just kind of
yeah.
say it. What I was thinking is that as you were saying that once you rose your arm to the square and you cast out Satan in Jesus's name, I think that as you're sharing that the times of lucidity lengthened and the times of being in that hellish space shortened, I think that's an interesting example of our lives. You know, I think that as we accept Christ and into our lives, like that, those periods of peace can grow, you know, and those periods of that kind of not understanding who we are and those feelings of like life is hell, our own version of hell,
Right.
to shorten. And I was just thinking that as you were saying that, because I was thinking like, well, you know, as I know that for me, as I've turned to the Savior over and over again through the hard times in my life, like he brings that peace that surpasses all understanding, as the scriptures say. So I thought that was an interesting point that you were making, maybe unintentionally, but that I saw as you were telling your story. So
it was very, it wasn't what I expected to happen. I thought that it would just be like going through a door or something, you know, or like I would wake up and it would be okay. Like waking up from a bad dream, like, oh, I'm so glad that's over. It was just a dream. You know, it might have seemed like it was real, but I just wake up and you get out of bed and it's all done.
yeah.
Maybe I thought that's what would happen, but it was very remarkable to me that was what, and I was rejoicing in every moment of the lucidity or the clarity, thinking, oh, I can spend more time in this happier realm. Like I can be back with my wife. And I hadn't experienced any, you know, and this is why we're talking about this, because I wouldn't have been able to come up with this on my own. But assuming that I did have more work to do in this life, right? We're going to stay with that premise. Had I seen the next life, I made the same choice. I may have said, "Oh, I'm good. I want to go there. Everybody else, they'll be fine," and left them behind. But that's an assurance to me that I did have a work to do.
And one thing that oftentimes I hear when people share near death experiences is this idea of you expected hell, so that's what you got. And I just want to point out that like you didn't expect that at
I
all.
expected the exact opposite of what I saw. Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting that you're listening to this story of this woman losing her husband, and 20 minutes later, you're facing a similar thing going, no, not me, not today.
Yeah.
And it wasn't what you expected. And so in recognizing that, why do you feel, have you come to any kind of peaceful like conclusions about why you experienced what you did? You kind of were saying one a little bit, but
That's what I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to sort out, like, because the question is like, okay, what does it mean, right? But that's a multi-layered question. Okay, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And then how is that going to influence my decision-making process for the rest of my life, right? And I made this analogy earlier on one of my Facebook posts, where I said another Lord of the Rings reference. Do you remember the part in, I think it's the Mines of Moria, and the Balrog comes from the deep? Do you know who I'm talking about?
it's been probably a decade since I've watched Lord
Okay,
of the Rings.
so the Balrog, he looks like a demon, right? And he's spewing fire and smoke. It's an incredibly unforgettable spectacle of just not just like a dark demon, but like one who just would consume anyone. And he had this fiery whip tail. I think he might have actually had a pitchfork or something. And Gandalf and all of the hobbits are running across this bridge. And Gandalf turns around and he rebukes, "You shall not pass," right? And the Balrog like breaks the bridge where Gandalf is standing, and Gandalf falls into this bottomless pit where he and the Balrog fall down forever. And I can't even remember the superlatives. He said, "I fell and I 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 fell." And it was like he spent like a year falling or something, and he was wrestling with this demon, right? And they thought he was dead. All of the hobbits and everybody was like, Gandalf is gone. The Balrog got him. And that's where the movie ends. And then the next chapter is they're in the forest, and that their greatest, their moment of despair. They're lost in the Mirkwood, and all of a sudden this light comes out, and they look up and they're like, "Oh no, it's somebody's coming to get us." And they look up, and it's Gandalf the White. He's changed from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White. And I'm not saying that I'm Gandalf the White, but what I'm saying is that this experience is, I want it to be something that elevates my spiritual understanding. And it may not be for 5-10 years or who knows when, but maybe I can help someone draw closer to Christ, because I can say, I have seen what you've seen. I have been in this place that you're talking about, and I have felt that fear. And only when I called upon my Savior did it go away. And we think of like Alma, right? That his soul was racked with eternal torment. And then when he called upon his Savior, he was pulled out of that abyss. So it will be an ongoing process, but I do feel it's always there. The memory is always there, and I'm always trying to process that. It's almost like a lens. And I look at the world in a different light altogether. And like some people have described, they're like, that world is more real than this world is. And I think about the senses that I have in this world, and I'm like, I feel like there's just not literally a veil, but like somebody's drawn the shades down, and I'm like, but I'm also seeking for more spiritual eyes to understand the world. Saying, okay, I know what my five senses are telling me, but what else is there? What do I need to be in tune to? And I was in Sunday school yesterday. It was elders quorum, but Sunday school basically. And the teacher just kind of looked at me and he just says, "I'm glad you're here," because the story's been told within our circle of friends, and it just feels good to be loved by so many. You don't realize how many people care about you until something like that happens, and you realize what you mean to the world. Like in that movie, the Afterlife, or Life After, what's it called? After Death. The lady who died in the kayaking accident, and she talked about how your actions have ripple effects. She was shown how her actions have a ripple effect like 30 times, that you can change the world just by being nice to one person, that we're all connected. So somehow I've got, that's what I feel like the work is. Like, speaking in broad terms, what that is. It's like, how does it elevate me to a higher spiritual plane? How do I feel more in touch with who I am as an eternal being, not just someone who is here in the mortal world, but that it persists. I mean, I knew all that from the teachings in the church, that this is a test, but I felt it, I knew it, I lived it, not in the way that I expected I would.
And what do you mean by that? Like, what do you feel like was a test in that experience?
Well, what I mean by test as like that, this is a probationary state. So the purpose of life for the listeners coming from all backgrounds, that this is people say life is short. Well, it is. It's really short. It's just a speck. And we lived before this life, and then we will live after this life. And this time frame that we are in is there are conditions created that give us a handicap. Our senses were much greater before we came, and that the purpose of this life is to bridle our passions. We were given this body that allows us to experience things that we could not experience as spirits. It's a tangible body that gives us sensory input. We have all these five senses. We can physically interact with the world. We can express emotions in ways that we couldn't before. We can feel physical sensations. We can feel the weight. We feel the gravity of what's happening to us in ways that we could not before. So by that I mean a test. And then the test really is, with all those changes to our state, do we choose God? Do we call to him in our time of need? Do we punish ourselves and say, oh, I deserve this to be in this state? Or do we say, no, I don't belong here? In both cases, right? There was a guy in that other movie where he said, I don't belong in heaven. And he was sent back. I don't belong in hell. And I want to go back.
Yeah.
So that's what I
mean. It's interesting because in this book, and then one of the really beautiful things that he talks about is that idea that we choose where we would like to be, and it seems like that's how it goes, and people choose a life separate from God or a life with Him, and surrounded by His love. And I think it's interesting because sometimes people have these near-death experiences where they didn't really believe in God, and God's like, here, look, I'm actually here, and they have these, it doesn't have to be even a long experience, a short near-death experience or a longer one. It doesn't matter the length, but the testifying, now they come back and they know that there's a creator. They know that there is a God. Some people don't like that term, but a creator and this presence that is greater and has created everything and is part of everything. And so and a lot of people tend to kind of dismiss the evil, the spirits that maybe have a darker agenda or a desire to live in this kind of darker place and to do these things that maybe we wouldn't consider very good, right? And a desire to live apart from that God. And so it's interesting because with your experience, you have to ask, like, well, okay, so if people have experiences where now they know there is a God, then what are the purposes of these kinds of experiences, if not to also witness that there is a place that's not as desirable that you can go, that you can end up.
Right. Because
and it's chosen, through agents.
Yeah. Well, and it talks about this. I think the prophet Lehi talked about this, where everything has its opposites. You have to experience, in this life, you experience the bitterness so that you can understand the sweetness. And perhaps that's one of the lessons there is, we experience pain in this life, and disappointment and injustice. And then in the next life, where there is justice and there is no pain, we can say, I know what pain is, and I'm so glad I don't have to feel it anymore. I made it through the test, and I'm so happy. I'm so joyful because I made it through the test. I chose to be with God, and I don't have to experience the pain.
And I feel like that's the soul growth a lot of the people that come back from these experiences are talking about, like when they say, well, the purpose of all this is for us to grow and to learn. And I think that's a lot of what it is. If we can learn what is less desirable, like what really resonates joy into our soul and peace into our soul, and then seek after those things, and to align our behavior and our choices with a goal of where we actually want to end up and who we actually want to end up with and emulate. And and not out of fear, but out of a deep love for and an understanding of the difference that there is in that in the choices of behavior, and the choices of way we treat each other. And so you didn't have, just because I know someone will probably ask, so I want to clarify, is that you didn't have any type of life review or anything like that. You said you didn't have a guide, so you didn't have this life review or anything. And so I guess this will probably be something that you unpack in time, is like, why were you given this experience, and what good can it do for the world? And did it help you at all solidify, just out of curiosity, did it help you at all solidify, like, what you feel you're called to do in life, and how you can help, what you can add to the world with your experience.
Um, and just like you say, it's something that over time that I'll have to unpack, and but what I feel like I can bring to the world, I think, is just more steadiness. That's what I feel like it's been 2 weeks, and I feel like it's brought maybe a little bit more of an evenness to how I see the world, where there's a higher power in control. And knowing that and being taught that is different than living through it, right? And it comes from, and this is where my wife's perspective has really helped me shape my own, and that is that if you look at all the miracles that led up to this experience, that allowed me to be sitting here before you with no deficits whatsoever, that is the great miracle, that God is in control. I mean, I missed 2 days of work. And when I have two part-time jobs together to make full-time. One of them found out that I had a stroke, and they just cleared my schedule for 2 weeks. They just canceled me for 2 weeks, assuming that that's what I was going to need to recover. And I was like, no, I got to get back. I do not want to miss a beat. I have to get back. I was very driven. So I only missed 2 days of work because I just felt like I had such a great responsibility to my family. But that was just the assumption that they made, that I was going to need that. But I was, like I said, I was 95% back the evening of the stroke. And it was the next day that I got that last 5% back. And when I see people, and this is why I'm like, did I really even have a stroke? But I'll tell you about that in a second. But that's the miracle. And I feel like that is one of the things that I have to share, is that God is in control. He could have healed me without the clotbuster. He could have brought me back from the dead if he wanted to. But in my situation, the medical intervention was there. The priesthood blessing was there. The prayers were there. One of our friends was she was actually, I think, in Missouri. She was painting one of her rooms just randomly. Then all of a sudden she's like, I need to pray. I don't know what I need to pray about, but I need to pray. And it was about at 3:00, which is when my symptoms started. And while she was praying, it came to her who she needed to pray for. And it was for us. So he was in control of the situation from the very beginning. And so that's why, just like you're saying, you're like asking me, what's the purpose? What are you trying to learn? And it's multifaceted, but there's definitely a purpose there. And to tell me that I have a purpose.
For sure. And I was just thinking, I, a few years ago, was in a pretty bad car accident. And I remember over the course of the next week or so, where God was like pointing out to me why it was me. Like, not only because sometimes we ask, like, well, why me, God? And we're upset about it. But if you kind of switch that, like, well, why me? Like, why did it need to be me? And not in a victim kind of like questioning, but in a, I'm so curious, why me? And he showed me what the blessing it was, not only for us, but for the other people on the road. You know, one of the things that he told me was, you know, I drove a big Suburban that could take a hit, where not everyone drives that kind of car. And I got hit by a big truck pulling a boat, and it could have turned out worse for someone in a different vehicle. And so I was in a vehicle that could handle that kind of wreck, you know, going at those high speeds on the highway. And so um it was just, and that was just one of the things. I mean, I was shown a handful of things over the course of the next couple of weeks, like, this is why I chose you and why this was actually a blessing for you, and a blessing to, and a mercy to other people. And because you could handle it, and here's why. And like, this is why it was for you that I did this.
Yeah.
And so, and I was just thinking, like, as you're talking, um, you, while you're going through this, you have this mind where you understand a lot of this, the medical, what's going on. And so you're able to analyze it a little bit differently, your wife as well. And so, I mean, I could see it being the, just kind of like the understanding that you have gives more credibility also to where you're like, no, this is really, I should have been worse off and I wasn't. And I see this miracle, and I know it's a miracle because I know what should have happened to me and it didn't, you know. And it doesn't make any sense for someone to pray for me at 3 p.m. and be given my name unless God was in this. And that witness of strength, and your friends happen to drive, you know, be almost to you when they find out you need help. And so I just think there's a lot of beauty in that. And as you realize, like, I know there's things in my life where I think God goes, well, I gave you these tools because of the things I've taught you. And so you can look at this differently. I've given you tools to see this through a different lens, and a lens that can help people this way. And it's a blessing. And so I just felt like I should share that, and that we are chosen for a reason. I really believe that. So,
well, it makes me feel good that I saw there was a post by a member on the Facebook group that said, I'm an ER nurse and I started having stroke symptoms. I think she was like in her 30s or 40s, and she made a full recovery because she was there. You know, she basically became a patient to her coworkers, received the treatment, and made a full recovery. And that, to me, just it says, okay, you got the treatment in time, that it did its job, but these are all the things that had to happen for you to get the treatment in time. If I had gotten in my car there was like a 5-minute window. If I had gotten in it before, it could have happened when I was at the hospital, and maybe would have been fine going to the ER. But if I had delayed my time going into the car, or gotten there early, I mean, I could have been on the road when I started having symptoms, and I wouldn't have wanted to drive with those symptoms at all. Or I would have been on the road, pulled off to the side, possibly stuck in that storm, sitting there among many of the other cars that had their hazards on. There were 3 accidents.
You wouldn't have been unique in that situation.
I would not have been, no. And I would have delayed treatment. I got the treatment inside of 2 hours. The treatment window is 4 hours. So I got the treatment very quickly. There was no mistake about that. And the blessing, the prayers. My wife was praying. She had everybody on Facebook and outside of Facebook, family members living and dead, praying for me. So that is the miracle. And for anybody who wants to listen, I'm constantly tuned into that, because everywhere I go at work is like, hi, how are you? How did it go? I mean, how are you feeling? Okay. And in the job that I do, time is money. So I don't always get an opportunity to say, hey, let's sit down and we'll chat for an hour. It's more like I get 30 seconds to say what I need to say. So I'm actually creating a narrative in my head that I can like get those like specific details out to those that talk to me. But interestingly enough, because I work at so many hospitals, there are probably hundreds of people who see me over the course of a month. So I can reach so many people just by showing up at work, being upright with color in my face. People who know the story are going to be like, he looks normal. I read his story and he looks normal. So you just don't know what, effect you might have on people just by that. So I feel a great responsibility to.
Well, hopefully it offers an opportunity for people to share with you as well an experience that they may have that they don't really talk about. I know that I've had people tell me about near-death experiences that they've had, like when they've almost died, I guess I should say. And then I ask them, well, did you have a near-death experience? Like, did you see the other side? And they wouldn't have told me unless I asked them straight out and said, well, did you see the other side? The angels? And they're like, they just kind of go, yeah. And because they don't really talk to people about it, they're like, oh yeah, they're used to telling the story of the trauma, because that's what people are comfortable with. But they don't get to share their story of their near-death experience very often, I have found. And so I have tried to be more conscious of asking people like, oh, did you see the other side? Like, how did that happen? And I'm surprised how many times it's a yes, really.
Yeah. Well, I have 3 friends, one I've already spoken with, and 2 other friends that as soon as I get an opportunity, I'm going to follow up with them. One of them was like, we need to talk. And I was like, okay, we'll talk. And then the other one recently had brain surgery. And you saw in that after death where that woman had that very, very invasive, the most invasive brain surgery I can imagine you possibly could have. And she saw the other side. We, saw the other side. But this one had similar brain surgery, and I can't remember the exact phrase she used, but I get the feeling that she had some sort of experience that she would only talk about to people who had similar experience.
Well, and I think it's probably a mercy. I'm just imagining like one thing in one of the near-death experiences that I read early on, one of the very first few that I'd ever read, she said that God will remove the spirit of the person so they don't have to experience the pain and the trauma.
I believe that.
And it had brought me a lot of peace just thinking about like abuse victims and people who die in very awful ways and that are not they're doing, to themselves or anything. So that brought me a lot of peace. And I was just thinking like how much they're got to be doing something, right? God's like, hey, you're going to make it through this brain surgery alive, but why hang out? Why hang out with all the trauma? Come on, let's go for a tour.
I started believing that probably a year or 2 ago where people would say, I felt no pain. Like they died in a car accident or something. Like, I felt no pain. And everybody's death is individual. And I think they really do, like, especially a just person, but maybe not even it's hard to say because you hear stories of people like victims of violence and they die with this horrified look on their face, or something like that. But I do believe that there are times when something like that is happening, and their spirit is removed and that they're insulated from all of the trauma that is happening. But I wanted to say one of the other people that I knew, or thought that might have had this experience, but he was in the hospital with COVID. And I said, I said, you were in the hospital with COVID, weren't you? Did you feel the pull? He knew exactly what I was talking about. He said, yeah, I felt the pull, and that's when I proned myself. So he felt like he was being pulled, and there's a commonality. I think the entry and exit is through the feet, and the entry is through the head somehow. And so he started feeling that pull, and he turned himself on his stomach. With his medical knowledge, he knew that if he turned on his stomach, his lungs would work better. And he survived because he did that. Like, this is a guy who was in the hospital for a month and got short of breath walking on flat ground. So he had a serious case. But yeah, he felt that same thing. And I bet if I'd said some of those key words to other people, they'd be like, yeah.
Interesting. Definitely very interesting. And I do think, as you said, it's all very individual.
Yeah.
And I think there's a purpose in that, like God will use any opportunity for our growth and learning and for our good.
Yeah.
And to help us understand our life and the purpose of this life. And so that was one of my questions I was going to ask you before we close, is that what is the purpose of life?
The purpose of life is for us to be given an opportunity to choose God. We're in this place where we forget who we were to Him, and we're in a distant place where our memories have been temporarily erased, and God wants to see if we'll be good when He's not there, and to what degree. You have kids, I have kids. My kids don't obey me when I'm not there. Not very well. Sometimes they are. I'll give them some credit. And it's God knows what we'll do before we do anything. So it's really proving to ourselves who we will choose. And I believe that it's fair. Even though this life is not fair, I believe that it's fair in the end. But I believe the purpose of life is for us to choose God.
Well, thank you. And how would you, if you could describe Jesus Christ in a couple words, like how would you describe him?
So through this process, I have a lot more sort of motivation to learn more and more about who He is. There's lots of information in the scriptures, and volumes could fill the world of who He is. And I would describe Him as my best friend, the most reliable being that you could possibly imagine. He is there. He knows us. And I thought it was great hearing someone say, I felt as though I was the only child that God loved. And He is the person who has so much love for us that the universe bends to His will. But in that incomprehensible universe, He loves us individually so much that we feel as though we are the only one who matters in that moment.
An interesting lesson on parenthood for me. I've been pondering that quite a bit lately.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
I'll tell a quick little story. There was a time when I had just finished my training, and it was time to move to Phoenix. And And it was going to be an expensive move. I didn't have much resources at the time. I was like, is this the right choice? Is this the place where I'm supposed to be? I'm not even sure how I'm going to pay rent because I don't know when I'm going to get paid. A lot of little questions and in my mind. And, you know, I got my wife and we didn't have any kids at the time, but just like, is this the right place to go? And in my head, I was kind of like, I would really like to feel like you're hearing me right now. And the answer that came was, I cannot forget you. You are graven on my palms. The marks of the nails from his crucifixion are on his palms. And that is a reminder to him, a reminder to us. His purpose, his sole purpose, is to redeem mankind. And it is there as a constant reminder. I almost felt ashamed when I heard that from him, because of course that's the scripture that I knew, and how could I forget that? But that was my reassurance that he knew in the details of the details of the details what I was going through, and that he was going to be there to help me. So that's who Jesus is to me.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Is there anything else that I guess you want to record and share before we finish up today?
Let me just double check if I had any notes before I move on. Yeah, I'll say one last thing. I don't know if all of us will go through that valley of the shadow of death before we die. But the message is to not be afraid of that valley. Jesus is the master of that realm. And also he is the master of our existence. If we either literally or figuratively feel as though we are in this valley of the shadow of death, not to be afraid and to call upon him. And he will be there in a moment to pluck you out of that danger. And that's my testimony of him. That he lives and he loves us. And he knows he loves us so much. He knows what's happening any minute of the day. And that there are angels around us. I did not see them in my experience, but I know that it was true. It's possible that there were too many to see. I have a very big family. My wife has a very big family. I was probably shielded at all times. But even if you don't have a big family, know that there are people watching you, people who love you, been with you. That's what I'd like to do.
Thank you. I think that will help. I think that will help people as they listen to this. And I know that it's a beautiful witness to hear as well, and a reminder for me and everyone, really. So I'll just add that I know that he is there for us too. There's this story that I know people have probably heard many times, and I know it's gone its rounds through social media, but as the two Christ walks with us on the beach, leaves two footprints, and this man's looking at his life, and he sees the two footprints, and then he only sees the one, and it's like, where did you go? And Christ is like, well, actually, I was carrying you then. I didn't. And I know that as I've tried to understand struggles in my own life and wondered where he was, he's taught me that as well, that he circles back around and he walks with us the whole time. And even when we don't learn something, it's not like he just goes, okay, well, you figure it out and I'll be back when you're ready. He keeps walking with us. And I love how he speaks to us. He speaks your language. He speaks my language in the sense that he tells us the answers we need. That's perfect for us in that moment. And what a beautiful response you got. As a reminder, like, how could I forget you? You're engraven on my hands. And what a beautiful thing. And so thank you for sharing and for testifying with him. I wanted to ask you, anyone who wanted to reach out to you about your story or anything, where can they reach out to you?
I'm on Facebook, Aaron Moulten, AARON, MOULTON. And I'm also on Instagram. I got to look up my username so I get it right, because I don't use it a ton, but I do use the Messenger for anybody who prefers that platform. It is.
Let me write those down too, so I have them to put in our description. Yeah, I'll put those in the description as well when I post this.
Yeah. Instagram, Zaron, ZAARON 6116.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for reaching out to me and wanting to share your story and giving me the opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity.
Welcome. I hope this reaches everyone who needs to hear it.
Yeah. Me too.
So thank you. I'm going to
thank you for being here, and don't forget to subscribe. God bless.